Welcome to Lento English. Ready to level up your English? Here we learn through stories, slow, clear, and fun. Listen, relax, and enjoy the journey.
1. Introduction. The world was preparing for a very important meeting called the G20. This meeting brings together leaders from the largest economies around the globe. The G20 group includes 19 countries, plus the European Union and the African Union. These leaders talk about big issues like global trade, money, and how to help all countries grow. Working together is key to the success of the world economy. The next G20 summit was scheduled to happen soon. The host country was South Africa, and the meeting would take place in the city of Johannesburg. Leaders and government officials from all member countries were planning their trips. The United States is a very important member of this group. For this meeting, the U.S. President Donald Trump was not planning to go himself. Instead, Vice President J.D. Vance was scheduled to attend the summit. Everything seemed ready for the important international event. However, the plans suddenly changed. President Trump made a surprising announcement on a Friday. He used his social media platform to share the news with the world. He declared that no U.S. government official would attend the G20 meeting in South Africa. This meant that Vice President Vance's trip was canceled. President Trump explained his choice. He said the reason was the treatment of white farmers in South Africa. These farmers are often called Afrikaners. The president claimed these people were facing many serious problems. He said they were experiencing violence, death, and that their land was being taken away from them unfairly. He called the choice of South Africa as the host country a total disgrace. He also suggested that South Africa should not be a member of the G20 anymore. This announcement immediately created a serious diplomatic problem. It was the start of a big disagreement between the United States and South Africa. South Africa's government strongly disagreed with the president's words. They said the claims about discrimination and violence were completely untrue. This story will tell you about this major conflict. We will look at why President Trump made this decision. We will see how South Africa reacted to the strong words. We will also learn about the history behind the land issues in South Africa. The disagreement is about more than just a meeting. It is about history, land, and the relationship between two powerful nations. The world watched closely to see what would happen next after the U.S. decided to boycott the important summit. 2. A big surprise. The announcement came on a Friday. President Donald Trump used his social media platform to share the surprising news. This news immediately changed the plans for the upcoming G20 summit. The summit was set to happen in Johannesburg, South Africa, on November 22 and November 23. The G20 is a very important meeting. It brings together leaders from the world's biggest economies. They meet to discuss global money issues and how countries can work together. President Trump announced that the United States would not participate. He said the U.S. would officially boycott the event. This decision was a big shock. Before this, the U.S. government had already made arrangements. Vice President J.D. Vance was scheduled to travel to South Africa. He was going to attend the meeting in President Trump's place. However, the president canceled Vice President Vance's trip entirely. President Trump stated clearly that no American government official would be attending the summit. President Trump used very strong language about the host country. He called the choice of South Africa as the host country a total disgrace. He gave a reason for this sudden action. He talked about the treatment of white farmers, often called Afrikaners, in South Africa. He claimed these people were facing serious human rights abuses. These abuses, he said, included violence, death, and the illegal taking of their land and farms. He wrote on social media, "No U.S. government official will attend as long as these human rights abuses continue." This statement escalated the disagreement between the two countries. It turned a routine international meeting into a diplomatic crisis. He had also said before that South Africa should be removed from the G20 group completely. This new boycott showed that he was very serious about his disagreement with South Africa. The leaders of the other G20 countries were stunned by the news. They knew the absence of the United States would make the meeting much harder. The U.S. is one of the most important economies in the world. Its absence creates big problems for global cooperation and trade discussions. The South African government had not yet responded fully to the claims. The pressure on them was immense. The world watched to see if this boycott would cause more countries to pull out of the meeting. The surprise announcement meant that the focus of the G20 summit was no longer just about the economy. It was now about a serious political conflict between two nations. 3. The reason why. President Trump had made a very big choice. Now, he needed to tell the world why the United States would not go to the G20 meeting. He used his social media platform again to explain his reasons. He said the choice of South Africa as the host country was a total disgrace. The main reason for the boycott, he explained, was the treatment of white farmers in South Africa. These farmers are often called Afrikaners. President Trump claimed that these people were facing terrible problems and abuses. He said that their human rights were being ignored by the South African government. He gave very serious details about the situation. He said that the white farmers were in danger of violence and death. He also claimed that their land and farms were being taken away from them. He used strong words, saying that they were being killed and slaughtered. He stated that the government was illegally taking their property. President Trump said that the United States would not send any official to the meeting. He stated no U.S. government official will attend as long as these human rights abuses continue. He made it clear that he thought South Africa should not be part of the G20 group anymore. He felt that a country with such problems should not be allowed to join the large world economies. This was not the first time President Trump had talked about this specific issue. He had been speaking about the situation of the white farmers for a long time. He had suggested before that South Africa should be removed from the G20 completely. The boycott was the most public way he showed his disagreement. He also looked ahead to the future. He finished his message by saying that he hoped to host the G20 meeting himself. He said he looked forward to hosting the G20 in 2026 in Miami, Florida. The world now understood the specific reason for the diplomatic fight. The problem was centered on the land and the lives of the white farmers in South Africa. 4. A different story. The government of South Africa heard the strong words from President Trump. They were surprised by his announcement. President Trump said that white farmers were in danger and that their land was being taken. South Africa had to give an answer to the world. The South African government spoke out very strongly. They said that President Trump's claims were not true. Officials denied that there was widespread racial discrimination or violence against white citizens. They felt that the American president was wrong about the situation in their country. President Cyril Ramaphosa, the leader of South Africa, addressed the issue. He confirmed that he had told President Trump personally that these claims of persecution were entirely untrue. South Africa felt that the American president did not understand the real life in the country. The officials pointed to the history of South Africa. They talked about the time called apartheid. Apartheid ended many years ago, but its effects are still visible today. They explained that white South Africans generally have a much better standard of living than the black majority of the country. This difference in life quality is still very large, even 3 decades after the end of apartheid. South African officials said they were shocked by the accusations. They were surprised that the American president chose to focus only on one group and ignore the economic reality for most citizens. They felt that President Trump was making the situation seem much worse than it actually was. They repeated that the government is working to improve life for all people in the country, regardless of their race. The government also denied that land was being illegally seized. They said that any changes to land ownership were part of necessary laws meant to correct historical problems. They wanted to make sure that the world understood that the official policy was not to hurt or discriminate against any group. South Africa believed President Trump's reasons for boycotting the G20 meeting were false. They felt that the American government was using a different story about South Africa to hide the real reason for not attending the summit. The diplomatic disagreement grew even bigger because both countries had completely different views of the truth. 5. A look at the past. We need to look back at the history of South Africa to understand the dispute. The country lived under a system called apartheid for many years. Apartheid meant that the government kept races separate by law. This system was very unfair. It gave power and rights to the white minority. It took away basic rights from the black majority of the people. This strict system of legal segregation ended in the year 1994. The white South Africans who ruled during apartheid are often called Afrikaners. They are the descendants of Dutch people who came to the country long ago. When apartheid ended, the country started to change. However, many problems from the past remained. One of the biggest problems is who owns the land. Many people in South Africa believe that the land is still owned unfairly. They say that white citizens still have control of too many farms and too much property. Because of this, the South African government created a new law. This law is called the Expropriation Act. This new law became official in February. The Expropriation Act gives the government the power to take land. They can take property if they say it is for the good of the public. The law states that in some situations, the government does not have to pay the owners for the land they take. Many white farmers believe this law is unfair. They feel they are being targeted because of their race. They claim they face serious violence, including deaths and the illegal seizure of their farms. President Trump has supported the Afrikaners for a long period of time. His interest in this issue started during his first term in office. However, his strong opinion became much louder after the Expropriation Act became law this year. He has used his social media to talk about these claims many times. He said that no American official would attend the upcoming G20 summit. He said this is because of the human rights abuses against the farmers. He called the choice of South Africa as a host a complete disgrace. He even suggested that South Africa should be removed from the G20s entirely. President Trump made a clear statement about his views on November 5. He said, "I am not going," referring to the G20's meeting. He repeated that South Africa should not be in the group anymore because of the bad things happening there. The history of apartheid and the new law about land are key to understanding why President Trump decided to boycott the important international event. 6. More than just a meeting. The disagreement between the United States and South Africa was much bigger than the G20 meeting itself. It was a clear sign of deep diplomatic friction. President Trump showed that his concern for white South Africans, sometimes called Afrikaners, was part of his overall government policy. He did not only talk about the problem, he took specific action. When President Trump returned to office in January, he made big changes to the U.S. refugee program. A refugee is a person who leaves their home country because they feel unsafe or are in danger. The standard refugee admissions program was suspended. This meant that most people who wanted to come to the U.S. as refugees could not. However, there was one major exception to this rule. The new policy made it possible for white South Africans to apply for refugee status. The U.S. government said these people were fleeing discrimination and violence in their home country. Because of this new rule, white South Africans began arriving in the United States in May. The total number of refugees allowed into the U.S. was also strictly limited. The administration set the annual limit very low. It was only 7,500 people for the entire year. This number was the lowest refugee intake in the history of the United States. Furthermore, the administration stated that most of the people admitted would be white South Africans. This choice showed that the issue of white farmers was central to the administration's focus on human rights. The South African government strongly disagreed with these actions. They continued to deny that white people faced unfair treatment or persecution. South African officials pointed out that white citizens generally had a much better life and higher standard of living than the majority of black citizens, even many decades after the end of apartheid. The decision to boycott the G20 meeting in Johannesburg was not a sudden event. It was the latest step in a series of problems between the two nations. This pattern of diplomatic friction had been growing for some time. Earlier in the year, another high-ranking American official skipped a G20 event. Secretary of State Marco Rubio did not attend a meeting of G20 foreign ministers. He chose not to go because he objected to the topics on the meeting's agenda. The agenda included discussions about global diversity and climate change. These actions showed a clear trend. The Trump administration was willing to skip major international gatherings when they disagreed with the host country or the meeting's focus. The conflict was not just about land reform in South Africa. It was about fundamental differences in how the two governments viewed global cooperation, human rights, and economic priorities. The boycott of the G20 was a public sign that the relationship between the U.S. and South Africa was under serious strain. This was more than just a missed meeting. It was a major statement of policy. 7. A meeting in an office. Before the United States announced the G20 boycott, the leaders of the two countries met. This meeting happened in Washington, D.C. It took place at the White House, the office of the American president. The date was in May, several months before the G20 summit was planned. U.S. President Donald Trump met South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. They met in the Oval Office, which is the main office in the White House. This meeting was meant to be a formal diplomatic event. However, the atmosphere quickly became very tense and difficult. President Trump immediately started to accuse the South African leader of serious problems. He spoke about white farmers, who are often called Afrikaners. Trump said that these farmers were facing terrible abuse, including violence and death. He claimed that the South African government was allowing these things to happen. During the meeting, President Trump even held up a printed news article. He used this article to support his claims of state-approved violence. He then went further, accusing President Ramaphosa of overseeing a genocide against white people in his country. To try and prove this very serious claim, President Trump played a video during the meeting. The video was meant to show the violence and the seizure of land from the farmers. The meeting quickly changed from a normal discussion into a difficult confrontation. President Ramaphosa strongly disagreed with all of the accusations. He personally told President Trump that the claims of persecution and discrimination were completely untrue. South African officials were very surprised by the strength of the American president's words. They pointed out that the reality in South Africa was different. They explained that white South Africans generally enjoy a much higher standard of living than the black majority of the country. This is true even many years after the end of apartheid. Despite the South African denial, President Trump was firm in his position. The meeting ended with the leaders far apart on the issue. This tense meeting in the Oval Office was a clear sign of the serious diplomatic friction between the two nations. The difficult exchange helped set the stage for the American decision later that year to boycott the G20 meeting in Johannesburg. This event showed the world that the disagreement was not small. It was a major problem. 8. What happens next? The G20 meeting in Johannesburg was set for November 22nd and 23rd. Despite the conflict, the summit will happen. The United States will not be there. President Donald Trump announced a complete boycott of the event. No U.S. government official will attend the summit in South Africa. This decision canceled the plans for Vice President J.D. Vance, who was scheduled to attend instead of the president. Trump used his social media platform to announce the decision. He called the event in South Africa a total disgrace. He said the U.S. would not attend as long as the alleged human rights abuses continue. The main reason for the boycott is the ongoing disagreement about white South African farmers, called Afrikaners. Trump repeated his claims that they face violence, death, and the seizure of their land and farms. He claimed the Afrikaners were being killed and slaughtered, and their property was being taken illegally. He believes South Africa should be removed from the G20 group entirely. The South African government strongly denied these claims. They said the accusations of racial discrimination were not true. President Cyril Ramaphosa stated that he had personally told Trump that the claims were entirely untrue. South African officials expressed surprise at the accusations. They pointed out that white South Africans generally enjoy a much higher standard of living than the black majority, even many years after the end of apartheid. This boycott is the biggest sign yet of serious diplomatic friction between the two countries. The G20 meeting will continue without the U.S. The G20 includes the 19 largest world economies, plus the European Union and the African Union. The group works to advance global economic interests. The world watches closely to see how this dispute will affect global cooperation. President Trump is already planning for the future. He announced that he looks forward to hosting the G20 summit in 2026. The location for the future summit will be Miami, Florida. Trump had previously tried to host the G20 near Miami during his first term, but it did not happen then. The current boycott is part of a pattern of friction. The U.S. government had previously changed refugee rules to make it easier for white South Africans to come to the U.S. The administration set a very low limit of 7,500 refugee admissions, with most spots reserved for white South Africans. The relationship between the two nations remains tense.